Hi, I am Verity Price, the 2021 Toastmasters World Champion of Public Speaking. And I just wanted to check in with you about this question that speakers often have. Should I or shouldn't I use props in my speech? Now, it's an interesting question because as a professional speaker, props are not something I've ever used. If I'm on stage in front of a big audience, I've maybe got my PowerPoint that's doing some of the work for me, but I always believe that my job is to do the work of painting a picture in the audience's mind and taking them on a journey. But there are times when a prop can really be a powerful addition to a speech and just add that little bit of extra intrigue or surprise or curiosity for the audience. And when we talk in Toastmasters, when we talk about the International Speech Contest, this is where we see props being used really well. And if you look back over the last few years of the people and the speakers who have won the World Championship of Public Speaking, they've often used a prop. We've seen a rose, a cigarette, a jacket, a ticket, underpants, all sorts of little things that add to the speech and really get people's attention. So in my journey to winning the championships this year and doing it virtually, I suddenly had a whole different kind of stage to work with. I decided to play with the idea of props. And so I want to look at my two speeches, my semi-final speech and my winning final speech, and just take you through the thinking that I went through to come up with the props that I used. So in my semi-final speech, the challenge, or as it was first called, Who's Walking Behind You?, I was speaking about my mum who always used to wear a headscarf. And so in the early versions of the speech, all I did was wear it as part of my outfit. So to the audience, it was a bit like, oh, that's interesting. She wears a scarf. And then when I spoke about my mum trying to give me the advice, I turned and I put it on and I looked at the camera and said, Verity, always leave the world better than you find it. And I had that moment to just become my mom. And then I dropped the prop back down and it became part of my outfit. But it then became an anchor point because when I was referring to my mom or lessons I'd learned from her, I was able to go like this or go, you know, you don't have to, you can be a little old lady or a big leader or just a bad-tempered teen. And so I could use the prop as part of my outfit, but also to emphasize my message. So that was the first prop that I used in that speech. And for quite a few versions, that's all I did. I then had an experience about 2 months into the contest journey. I was on the beach and I was picking up litter. It's what I do. It's what I speak about in the speech. It's what my mom used to do. It's what she inspired me to do. And there I was picking up pieces of plastic, kind of collecting them. And I thought, maybe I should use this in my speech. I say that I now pick up plastic. That could be a really relevant prop and quite surprising when I suddenly go, I drive my family mad because I'm always picking up pieces of plastic. And then I held up the actual plastic I'd collected on the beach. I mean, I'm quite sad. There's a mask in there. You realize how much rubbish we are dropping in the planet as a result of the pandemic now. But I wanted that to be an example. At the beginning, it was a much smaller bag. And then I got feedback from people saying, Verity, it needs to be a bit bigger, a bit more, you know, in your face in the screen. So I collected a bit more rubbish and I put it in this bag. And I just had it off screen. And then when I did the big reveal, I just went, and I actually just did it with a facial expression like, yeah, this is what I do now. Mom has rubbed off on me. So this was for me a really fun prop. And if it had been my choice, those are the two props I would have had in that speech. But what happened was as I was touring around the world, practicing my speech at different clubs, I kept getting feedback of people saying, when you speak about your mom's funeral and you speak about, you know, this book that you had that people had written in, we want to know what they said. We want to hear what people said about her. And that was quite hard because my speech was already sitting at 7:15. You know, you don't want to get disqualified on time. So I had to rewrite a few things. And I wanted to put in what they'd said, which meant I actually had to go find the book from her funeral. So I went to visit my sister Kay. And I said to her, you know, let's find that book that everyone wrote in. And it was quite an emotional day for us, going and finding the actual book that people wrote about my mom in. And we cried and we read through all these beautiful things. And I realized that as a prop, this could really draw an audience in to the fact that there was a book at my mom's funeral and people did write incredible messages about her in it. And so this was right towards the end for the semi-finals. I brought this in as a prop and it really anchored me to the speech. I think it made it very real for people that there was a book and that this wasn't a story I was making up. And that, when for me, is when a prop has a lot of value, when it's tangible, it's concrete, and it really adds to what you've been speaking about. So those were my 3 props in my semi-final speech. I had a lot of fun working with them, working out how to be able to pick it up. I had to have the book opened so that I could get to the right page. Otherwise, you end up with a lot of fiddling. So you have to practice. People also gave me feedback that they wanted to see the writing. So I had to make sure when I picked it up, I held it to the screen and actually worked with the screen a little bit to let people into this special part of my speech and let them into my world. So those were my 3 props for the challenge. A scarf that was a wardrobe piece but also became a prop. This was actually my sister's suggestion, that I become my mom and look at me. We had such fun playing with that scene. And then the plastic to prove that I had been living into her lesson. 3 simple props, quite a lot of props. In fact, I think I probably had the most props out of any semi-finals. Well, I know in my semi-final I had the most props. I was like, 3 props, that's a bit much. But it was such fun to play with them, and they added to the speech and they brought the speech to life, especially in the virtual space. Then we get to my final speech, a great read. Now, this was an interesting one because there was only one prop that I needed to use, and that was my dad's letter. And I had it on this, just to the side of my screen so that I could pick it up and have this experience of reading the letter from my dad. Now, there's been some interesting feedback about this prop because everyone goes, this is an old letter. That looks so clean. It looks like you've done it from a photocopier. In fact, we can't see the writing, so we don't know that it's real. So just to show you, there it is, says, "Love, Dad." So this was a letter from my dad, but it wasn't the letter. I used this letter, and he actually wrote this when I was 16, so this is an older letter. It just was on stronger paper. That's why it looks so new. The letter that I speak about, was on airmail paper. And you'll notice that as a prop, this is quite tricky to open. So I did use this a few times in practices in clubs, and I used it with all the pages, and people said it was too much. So then I tried to use it with 1 page. But the crinkliness of it for me was a problem. So I made a decision to use a letter from my dad, but just one that was easier for me to use on screen. But this is actually something that's had some a few comments about, but it was the real letter. This is a letter from my dad, and it helped me connect with him, but it wasn't the letter that I was referring to. So sometimes you've also got to make a choice in that moment. What prop do you want to use? And so that was the only prop that I ended up using. For a while, when I spoke about going to Facebook, I actually held up a cell phone, and eventually I went, I don't need a cell phone. I can act that, and people will still know that I'm talking about scrolling on a cell phone. So that for me is a braver choice, and that was something that was informed by my coach, Lance Miller. In his guidance to me was only use a prop if it is 100% adding value to your speech. In his winning speech in the ultimate question, he pulled out a parking ticket, but then he put it back. He didn't use it again. So, only use it when it adds value, when it makes your speech more powerful. I actually, in earlier versions of my speech, I was going with the whole trying to use signs before it was called a great read, it was called the plan. And I was like, I had a plan. I was going to be, a great career, married with children, beautiful house by 30. I never expected my life to look like this. So it was quite humorous. It was quite fun. But when I sent this version of the speech to Lance, whoa, he came back to me and said, no, Verity, no, that is being lazy. You can use your words, you can use story, you can draw your audience, and you do not need a prop for that. And that's actually how we started arriving with, when I was a little girl, I used to love snuggling on my dad's lap, listening to him read me fairy tales. It was a far more powerful start to the speech. So be very intentional with how you use props. If they are going to add value, if they're going to emotionally connect your audience with your speech, something like a letter or this book that really made my mom's story real, then use them, and use them sparingly, and rather rely on your words, your wordcraft, your body language, because I don't need a phone here. I can completely let you know that I'm on Facebook just by the way I'm holding my hand. So play with this, but also trust yourself to tell your story more than you rely on a prop. So that's my advice. In my 6-month experience up to winning the World Championships of Public Speaking, I really got to play with props and see what works, what doesn't work. And so play with them, but less is more when it comes to using props. And to prop or not to prop, the question is over to you. But from my side, have fun finding your way to tell your story.